Hi, welcome to Sacred You. I am Reverend Tricia McCannon, and we're here with our instructor, Tricia McCannon, for our brand new course, Mary Magdalene and the Return of the Divine Goddess. So, welcome, Tricia.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be with you and all of our listeners and fans out there and people who have been following the evolution of Mary Magdalene and the awakening of the Divine Feminine now in our age. It's such an exciting time.
You know, it really is. And at Sacred You, we're thrilled, actually honored that we're running this course. And I want to share with everyone why, and then we want to dig in because you're going to share about Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail on this broadcast. But the reason that I'm so honored and so excited to not only work with Tricia, but to have Tricia's course on Sacred You is because this course is over 9 hours of video teaching from, personally by Tricia. And I truly believe, having seen the course myself, that it is this knowledge, this wisdom that needs to return to this world, and that we need to remember this so the balance can start to be brought back. And so it's an amazingly cool course. The knowledge and all that, if you're a history fan or in any way, you're going to find it off the charts. But the larger consciousness that it shares and the energy that I believe has a real ripple effect in our world is powerful. So Tricia, I just want to publicly say thank you. Thank you for bringing these teachings, to us in this way.
It's totally my honor and my pleasure. And I think that there are many, many thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people around the world that are really awakening to the presence of the Divine Mother. And of course, we've known the Divine Mother in, let us say, the last 1,000 years through Mary. And of course, Mary has over 250 appearances all over the world, some of which I talk about in the course and the miracles and so forth. So, that is the let us say, the funnel or the filter through which we've known that feminine. But Mary Magdalene, since the publication of the Da Vinci Code and the conversation really about the fact that there was a lineage of Christed kings and queens that came through that Jesus and Mary Magdalene line that was known about by the early Catholic Church and honored. But then later that information became hidden and it became suppressed and so forth. And it went underground, which is where we come to some of these incredible mysteries of the Holy Grail. Because if you remember, the King Arthur story takes place in the 500s AD, 500 years after Jesus. And that is about the time that the Divine Feminine was beginning to be really suppressed. Around 400 AD, the Theodosian decrees basically came out saying, let's close or tear down temples to any other expressions of the divine creator, except, this one particular expression. And then that was it. Or let's conscript them and take them over, since after all, they're on ley lines and they're holy places. And so we'll just take the energy that's been gathered for centuries there, and we'll just kind of harness it and redirect it ourselves. But around that same time, around 591 AD, is when Pope Gregory I, in his 33 homily, came out and said, basically he implied that Mary Magdalene was a fallen woman. And of course, everybody knew before that she wasn't. But what he actually said was, my brothers, where did she get the money for that expensive spikenard, which she used to anoint Jesus's head and his feet, which was actually a very ancient rite from Mesopotamia that basically was honoring the let us say the next Horus or solar king, and it marked her as his bride and also as the high priestess of the mysteries. And so everyone in the ancient world knew this, but of course, we've lost the thread of the plot today because it's 1,500 years later. And so Pope Gregory I said, my brothers, where did she get the money for that? Clearly, she must have gotten it from forbidden acts of the flesh, where she perfumed her body. This is like a total, made up story. And if we tell the lie enough, often enough, and embellish on it, then, 100 years later, 200 years, 500 years later, who knows the difference, except for small groups of initiates, like perhaps the Templars, the Cathars, and some of those groups that around 1200, 1300 AD, the church basically kind of set out to get rid of, because they didn't really want this information to become known to the general public. And so, the Holy Grail is a very big subject, and it has so many multidimensional levels. And I don't know about you, but I have always been fascinated by the Holy Grail. I always loved those legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the Lady of the Lake and the Sword Excalibur, and I in themselves are just so beautiful. But why, of all the stories out there, have these continued to echo down through the centuries? And I know it is really because there is information that we need, that is true history, that is encoded in these symbols. And it's one of the reasons why in this class that I've created for Sacred U University, there's six modules. Six modules. So the first three, as you know, are about the history of the goddess, the archaeology that we've discovered her worship went back some 230 to 800,000 years. I mean, who knew? I mean, like a lot of you, I was very, Judeo-Christian, male identified. And of course, there is a very beautiful aspect of the divine masculine, but this is the balance. This is the other side, the divine feminine. And then we have a whole section on the lost symbols of the goddess. We have a whole section on the many expressions of the goddess as she's been known in cultures around the world. And then the last three modules are all around Mary Magdalene, the quest for the Holy Grail, unweaving, untwisting those knotted threads and making sense of them so that we can begin to understand what it is that they were trying to convey to us in this story and in this history. And then, of course, the true teachings of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, some of which we have in the New Testament, things like love your neighbor as yourself, and forgiveness is the key, and the kingdom of heaven is within. And thank goodness we do have those beautiful teachings. Mm-hmm. But there's also these other teachings where he was honoring the masculine and the feminine, the Abba, Amma, the father Abba, the mother Amma, and also the divine daughter and the divine son. And that whole stuff got shoved under the carpet because, of course, the Roman Empire was very patriarchal. And the Jewish patriarchs had gone from a more matriarchal society to a heavily patriarchal society. And then, all of that combined kind of created the rise of the Roman Empire that became the filter through which the early Catholic Church began. And then as it kind of went down through the centuries, I think in the beginning they had a lot of this knowledge, but, and you'd have some emperors or popes that were more conscious and aware and really trying to live more truly into higher spiritual principles, and you had others that were very dogmatic and very patriarchal and very oppressive and punishing to anybody that they considered to be a competitor. So you had the whole kit and caboodle there. Yeah. And so here we are 2,000 years later trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out what the heck happened to throw us out of balance in our world. And I think Mary Magdalene is a major key to understanding where we kind of got off the path and how truth became skewed, and how we think that it's only the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost that created reality, when anyone can notice that it takes it takes a masculine and a feminine, a mother and a father, in order to come together to create life in any species, and except maybe androgynous earthworms, that might be an exception. Maybe God is an earthworm, an androgynous earthworm at the cosmic scale, of course.
I'd like to think we've evolved a little bit from that point. We have a question in the queue, and so thank you for sharing all that. And I never knew, specifically how Mary Magdalene went from being considered Jesus's apostle of apostles and a high priestess of the mystery schools to a prostitute or a fallen woman. And so very specifically what you just explained is, for me, that's like decades of lost knowledge that I'm happy to have. So, it's interesting, right? If we repeat stuff enough and enough and enough, people start to believe it. So if we share this knowledge and this wisdom and people have these conversations, then it starts to become more of the norm again, and the balance hopefully will come back. And so again, you've shared so much of this in your course. There's a whole module, there's a whole 90 minutes of you teaching specifically on the Holy Grail and Mary Magdalene. And let's just dig into that a little bit more, though, right now. And for listeners, if you can type your questions in the queue, Tricia will answer any of your questions. And let's
I can't actually see the questions, so you'll have to repeat them.
Yeah, I'm about to ask you the first one. So Sean has a question, and we'll go between questions and kind of answering, but it's really at the heart of the Mary Magdalene, the history of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And you talk about this in the course. You go into a lot of detail, but Sean asks, if Mary had any children with Jesus. So what do you say to Sean regarding that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that they had children. And the question is, did they have one? Did they have two? Did they have three? In the research that I've done, they definitely had one. And I think the chances are very good that they had three. I think there was a girl and two boys. But, this is one of the things that's very challenging about this, because very deliberately, Jesus and Mary Magdalene concealed the fact that they had children, because the Roman Empire, when they put someone to death, and I'm sure certainly the Sanhedrin Council that was kind of behind the political motivation for that, they go after any heirs, because they don't want retribution. You kill my dad and I'm coming after you. They don't want the followers to that of someone as powerful as Jesus, who was thought to be the Messiah, the Christed one, and in his age. They don't want anyone coming after them. So that had to actually really be hidden. And that's a big piece. So this is one of the reasons, right after the crucifixion, that Joseph of Arimathea took Mary the mother, Mary Magdalene, Mary Salome, Mary Jacobi, and a whole group of apostles to the south of France. And then some stayed there and some continued up to the Celtic lands. And as I talk about in the class, France, of course, the south of France and also England are really holy lands. I've actually gone to England probably 30 or 40 times. That whole area near Glastonbury, which was ancient Avalon, is very potent, very powerful. This is where Joseph of Arimathea set up the very first church in the whole world in 37 AD. And then the south of France, there's Sainte Marie de la Mer, which is where they landed. And that's, it's Mary by the sea, Sainte Marie de la Mer. And they're white horses that run along the sea in an area called the Le Carmage. And every year there's an incredible festival that celebrates the Marys arriving there, where over 10,000 people show up, and they have this kind of wooden boat and effigies of the Marys. And then there's all these other areas like Rennes-le-Chateau. And I'm actually going to take a group to the south of France around these mysteries in October. So if you're interested, you can email me at Tricia McCannon 1111 at yahoo.com and tell me you're interested, and I'll get back with you. But that whole area was where the Cathars were, the south of France. The Templars were in that area. So it's definitely a very potent area. But what most people don't realize is that there's also was this lineage in England, in Britain, ancient Britain. And Joseph of Arimathea setting up the first church, when finally Roman Christianity came to Britain, the original Christianity of Jesus had already been established for several hundred years. And this is one of the reasons why some say that that's the real Holy Land, because the descendants were believed to have gone there. Now, of course, the conversation about the Merovingian lineage, which has to do with the true vine. You remember when Jesus said, "I am the true vine. No one comes to the Father but through me." Well, of course, that was a Hermetic symbol that was long linked to the Horus Kings or to Osiris. It's the lineage of the solar lords, the divine masculine energy. which was the complement to the divine feminine energy that we talk about in this course. And so that lineage, there are people who've done some very interesting research around this, myself included. Some of them are Celtic, some of them are British, and they have unearthed records really about the lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene that were in France. They actually believe that eventually their name was changed to La Plantard, meaning the small seed or the small plant. And of course, around the 500s, when the church betrayed that lineage, they actually murdered the male heirs, save one. There's one that escaped up to the Celtic lands, and he was actually taken by a Templar, or the Templars weren't officially around exactly at that time. They didn't start until the 1100s, but it was the same lineage of these knights that were protecting the holy bloodline. And the women were forced to marry into the usurper line, which eventually became the French lineage of Philippe the Fair and some of those French kings, Louis the 14th, all those famous guys that we hear about centuries later. That was actually the usurper line. They actually were not the Christed lineage. So that lineage had to go underground to survive. And this is part of what the Holy Grail is about. I mean, there's so many levels to the Holy Grail, as I talk about in the course, but certainly one level is those Knights of the Round Table, the symbol of round, the feminine, were given their sovereignty by the divine feminine, the Lady of the Lake, the feminine overseeing energy of the land, who found that one good man, Arthur, who put right over might. In other words, conscience and ethics over brutality, force, and I can take what I want because I'm stronger, which we can see even today. We have that going on in the world. We've got tyrants and we've got people who are trying to live according to ethics. And so that was the beginning of trying to find that lineage and follow it through.
And so the tie-in between Mary Magdalene specifically that you discuss in the course, and I know you have a whole module on the Holy Grail, Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail.
It's huge.
It's huge, and you go into such detail, and just what you just shared there is just,
a little bit.
Yeah. It's a little bit. However, I feel like, it's a graduate level in, our history of spiritual history of Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail. But let's just talk about you're starting to break up a little bit. We're going to close in just a moment. I just want to say Shayna said she loved the course, so thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much. Email me by all means, Yeah. And I'm at Tricia McCannon 1111 at yahoo.com. And of course, sometimes I look at my Facebook, but I tend to look at my personal email a lot more often.
Right. So, but let's just tie it together, though, about Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail, though. What is many levels, lots of incredible information, but why do people associate, or why do you associate the legend of the Holy Grail and Mary Magdalene together? What's the main reason for that?
Well, Mary Magdalene was chosen as the overseer of the inner church. In all the great mystery schools, there was an exoteric or outer teaching, and there was an esoteric or inner teaching. The esoteric actually taught you the path of mastery, the way to actually become spiritually enlightened. So Peter was, the rock of the church. He was the exoteric. And that level is supposed to teach you things like right and wrong, the 10 commandments, don't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. I mean, these are kind of basic things we all know we should, adhere to. The esoteric teachings were really the spiritual technologies of enlightenment. And Mary Magdalene went on to teach for many, many decades, and most of us know nothing about this, in England, in France, and in that area where the early Christians would meet about every 3 years on the Isle of Cyprus, where Joseph of Arimathea had a estate, and they would spend many weeks, like a month together, and then, separate. And she would bring forth Jesus's teachings. But I also, as you know, and I know we'll do another Facebook Live on this, she had her own teachings that are so beautiful and so profound. But part of what she and they were teaching was actually a path called the way of the Chalice. In the New Testament, we hear Jesus was teaching a path called the way. And so this is the way of the chalice. So the chalice became a symbol of the path of mastery. And, I decode that in the course. I explain what is the symbolic significance, and what does it tell us about the spiritual technology about how to become enlightened. And so that's actually the last module is about that. But as I said, the path of the Holy Grail has so many dimensional levels. It's not only connected with Arthur and the Round Table and the lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and we know she was up there because there are all sorts of legends of her with her son up there, as well as, of course, Mary, the mother, had come there with Jesus as a young boy. And then he returned to study with the Druids there for a couple of years. And of course, I talk about that in the Jesus class that I created for Sacred U University. And so I've this isn't like wild speculation. As you know, my dad was a lawyer, so I have like this anal retentive part of me that's very, I have 1,200 footnotes in my books. Okay, I can't help it. So I've actually laid out all the pieces of the puzzle and the history and shown you where to find the information, so that you can also see how, when it's put together, it basically forms a map. And you can make your own mind up, but when you see that level of information and the evidence, because there's so much evidence if you know where to look. And that's part of what I do as a teacher, is try to bring that forward so that other people can, have the same information, and then they can come to their own conclusions.
Right. Well, and you do that. You do it brilliantly. I encourage everyone. We feel so passionately about this that it's a 6-module course, and we give you the first module you can watch for free. So
that's an amazing thing, because that's like over an hour, and it's jam-packed as any of the rest of them.
Yeah, it's close to an hour and a half. Actually, the first module is jam-packed, and you learn so much even in that module. But I encourage you, we have the link in the comments. I encourage you to click on the link, watch the first module, consider taking the course. As Tricia said, it's multi-level, multi-dimensional. The information it's
rich. It's rich.
And life-changing. And I truly believe with all my heart that this is the knowledge and the wisdom, a big part of it that needs to be known, for us to truly raise our consciousness in this world.
Patricia, to me, it's time. And it's one of the reasons why I love doing these classes. They take a lot of time and energy to put together. But I think that these are critical things for us to really heal our world. And I think it is the balance of bringing the divine feminine up to balance with that divine masculine that's going to bring us back into wholeness. And understanding what has been given to us that is truthful and what has been hidden or suppressed, I think is very key to it. So this allows us to begin to step forward and understand the divine feminine in a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it is. And Angela in the comments concurs and says, yes, it is time. So I know Angela has also enjoyed the course. She's taking the course also.
Thank you so much, Angela. I can't see the names like I usually can on mine, but I thank you guys so much for tuning in. And by all means, watch course 1, and I hope you love it. Oh, look at these little hearts. I see those little hearts. That's so nice. Thank you guys very, very much. I think we're going to do another Facebook Live. Isn't it next week? Don't we have that on the schedule?
We have it somewhere on the schedule. It will be about Mary Magdalene and her teachings. And so then we'll post about that too. So
it's Wednesday. It's next Wednesday on the 28th at 3:00. Eastern Standard Time.
So we'll be back for then. So until then, we hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail, and all the wisdom that Tricia has already shared. We encourage you to check out the course. And Tricia McCannon, thank you so very much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all so much for listening.
Okay. Bye for now.